that brings us to reinforcement. And we're going to really dive into reinforcement. That's the title of today's workshop. So we're going to really dive into it. Again, we wanted to review these foundational concepts to make sure we had that foundational understanding before we start to talk about some things that are a little more complex. And reinforcement is a type of consequence. Reinforcement is a consequence, so it's the change in the environment following a behavior. Again, we talked about consequences occur after behavior, and reinforcement is a type of consequence. And reinforcement can increase the future occurrence of similar behaviors in similar contexts. So let's dive into really what does similar behaviors in similar contexts mean. So let's dive into similar behaviors in similar contexts. So behaviors have a purpose, and these purposes are referred to as functions in the field of applied behavior analysis. And behaviors can serve multiple functions. A single function can be served by multiple behaviors. So let's take 2 minutes to think of a behavior that can serve multiple purposes and functions. And you can pause this video and come back. The examples I came up with is we have the behavior of cooking a meal, and this can serve several different functions. So maybe you just enjoy cooking, and that's the purpose to you for engaging in the behavior of cooking a meal. You really, really just love cooking. Or maybe your child is hungry, so that's the purpose or function, is you've got to cook a meal so that they can get fed. Or maybe it's your job. Maybe you're a chef, and that's the purpose of you cooking a meal is because it's your job and you're a private chef. Or lastly, maybe it's your anniversary and you're cooking a meal to give it to your partner. Now, let's take 2 minutes to think of a function and several behaviors that can serve that function or purpose. So we're going to flip it. For my example, I came up with the function to get food. So that's the purpose. We want to get food, and there's several behaviors that can help us get food. So that could be we go to a restaurant to get food, we cook for ourselves, maybe we order DoorDash to get food, or maybe we go to the grocery store. Again, there are several behaviors, and this list could probably go on, that can serve the function of getting food. To talk about reinforcement more, we're going to talk about this example. Again, we talked about how reinforcement increases behaviors in similar contexts in the future. So in this example, we've been at the beach all day long. So our motivation is we've been at the beach all day long. We're super thirsty. We're super hot. We haven't drank in all day. And the antecedent is a drink cart passes by. So maybe there's those little drink carts on the beach, and there's one that passes by you, and that's the antecedent. Again, that environmental change that's going to result in a behavior. And in this case, we're going to buy the drink. So we are going to buy the drink, and then we have our consequence, which is going to be feeling refreshed. So again, we've got that motivation. We've been at the beach all day long. We're super thirsty. A drink cart passes by. That's our antecedent. We buy the drink, which is our behavior. And then the consequence is we're feeling refreshed because we got to drink our favorite drink on the beach. In the future, in a similar context, we're at the water park all day, and a drink cart passes by, and then we buy a drink and we're feeling refreshed. So again, because of in the past we've been reinforced, so that behavior of buying a drink has been reinforced with feeling refreshed, that is going to result in the future in similar contexts, like being at a water park and a drink cart passes by. We're going to be more likely to engage in that behavior of buying a drink so that we can feel refreshed. So again, this is kind of the process of reinforcement because that behavior is increasing in similar contexts in the future. Now we'll talk about some myths of reinforcement. So a common myth is that we reinforce the individual, but we don't. We reinforce the behavior that the individual is engaging in. So Cooper 2020 talks about that the procedural focus and the primary effective reinforcement are on the behaviors that it follows. So again, the individual is engaging in those behaviors, but we're not reinforcing the individual, we're reinforcing the behavior that the individual is engaging in. Another myth is that feedback is the same as reinforcement. So reinforcement is defined functionally by its effect on the future responding, and feedback is just defined by its formal characteristics. So Cooper talks about how reinforcement, again, is defined functionally, and we talked about that reinforcement increases the future responding, and so it increases that future behavior. Feedback is just feedback, right? It's just when we're receiving feedback. So if feedback isn't reinforcing, it's not considered reinforcement. So if feedback isn't increasing the future occurrence of our behavior, then it's not considered reinforcement. Maybe for some, it is reinforcing, and we'll talk about how reinforcement is so individual, but feedback in general is not the same as reinforcement because again, reinforcement is defined functionally by, again, that it's increasing the future occurrence of behavior, versus feedback is just when you're giving someone feedback. And again, it isn't necessarily reinforcement. And the last myth is praise is a reinforcer for everyone. So preferences and potential reinforcers are individual. And again, like I mentioned, we're going to really dive into that later. But reinforcement increases the future occurrence of a behavior. So if praise isn't doing that for an individual and for an individual's behavior, then it isn't considered reinforcement. Now, some people, praise may be considered a reinforcer. And so then when they're given praise for what they're doing, when they're given praise for the behavior that they're engaging in, that behavior is going to increase. But for some people, that isn't necessarily a reinforcer, and it's important to really consider the individual reinforcers of everybody. Let's review some important terminology. So first, we have reinforcer, and that is a noun, and it's going to refer to a stimulus. Then we have reinforcing, and that's going to be an adjective, and that's going to describe the property of a stimulus. So a stimulus can be reinforcing. Then we have reinforcement. That's going to refer to the process that we've been talking about, where a consequence increases the future responding of a behavior. That's reinforcement, and it's a noun. Then we have to reinforce, which is a verb, and that is to deliver a consequence after response. Types of reinforcers. So there are 5 types of reinforcers. We have in the previous slide, we talked about activity reinforcers, and we're going to kind of take a deep dive into activity reinforcers and talk about them a little more. Activities can be such powerful reinforcers. You can take some time to think about the activities that you engage in that are so reinforcing, but we can also take some time to think about things that our students love to do, what activities they love to do, the things that they look forward to all day long, get super excited about. So maybe these things could be free time on the computer, maybe it's playing a rounds of classroom Heads Up 7-Up, maybe it's playing Lava Monster at recess, maybe it's playing soccer at recess, maybe it's playtime with the classroom toys, maybe it's reading time for some. So again, activities can be such powerful reinforcers, and again, oftentimes they really occur a lot within the day of a student at school. With activity reinforcers, we can use the Premack principle. So the definition for this is making the opportunity to engage in a behavior that occurs at a relatively high free operant or baseline rate, contingent on the occurrence of low frequency behavior, will function as a reinforcement for the low occurrence behavior. So this is a major jargon warning. Let's break this down. Here is another definition for the Premack principle, and this kind of starts to break down really what the previous slide was talking about. It can seem very complex with all of the jargon, but it's really quite simple. So in this definition, it talks about what is the individual doing when any opportunity exists. So what is the individual doing most often? Those activities are probably going to be reinforcers. So in the previous example, it talked about those behaviors that this person is engaging in a high rate of. Those behaviors are likely to be, those activities are likely to be reinforcers. So if you just think about it, maybe you have a student that's reading a lot, and any free time they have, they grab their book and they're reading. That's probably going to serve as a reinforcer. That activity is probably going to serve as a reinforcer. Or maybe you have another student that anytime they get, they're running over to the cars and they're racing the cars. Or maybe another student that anytime they get, they're in the sensory bins. Those activities that they're engaging in just on their own, that they are engaging in at a high frequency, when the opportunity exists, those will likely serve as reinforcers. So that allows us to create a first then. And I'm sure you've heard of the first then boards or using a first then statement. So this is when we use a low probability behavior, so things that they're likely not going to be engaging in on their own, like taking a math test, cleaning up the desk, individual work, completing a writing worksheet, attending to group instruction. Again, those things that occur at a low probability. And then we are going to follow it with a high probability behavior. So things we talked about, the things that they're just engaging in at a high rate when they can. So maybe that's playing outside, reading their favorite book, playing with toys in the classroom, free time with the sensory bins, Kahoot with friends. And this first then, or Premack principle, can be used really with anything. We just want to make sure that it can be understood by the student. So maybe we have students at varying stages of learning. Maybe some students can just be vocally told that, okay, first we're going to take our math test, then we're going to play outside. Or maybe some students might need more of a visual schedule. So maybe we have a picture of cleaning and then followed by a picture of playing with toys in the classroom. So again, we're going to have to really tailor this to the student and their abilities, their learning levels, but we can use this to use the high probability behavior as a reinforcer for the low probability behavior. So we can have all those activities that we can use to reinforce things that might be a little more difficult for the student, like taking a math test, attending to group instruction, things like that. Now you will go away from this slide and you're going to watch a video on the pre-MAC principle and then come back.